In this part of lecture 14, we will take a look at remote access, that is accessing a server from your client machine. I do want to say before we get started that a lot of the things that are discussed in the book don't quite work really as they are discussed in the book, just because these are all sort of older techniques and they've sort of been superseded or they've been modified in most versions of Linux. If you're looking at a standard Unix system, you might still see some of these commands, although they're not really recommended. So I will go over some of the things that are discussed in the book, but then I'll also show you the alternatives that we use in Linux these days. Let's start with FTP. So FTP is the File Transfer Protocol program. It's one of the most frequently used services for transferring files. So you can use FTP to, for example, download stuff from an FTP server, or you can upload things if you have permissions to do that. Files of any type can be transferred, although you might have to specify, you have to switch to ASCII mode or binary mode. So if you have a large file, if you have text files, you want to use ASCII mode. I think that's the default still. But if you have a .z file, tar.z file, or .tar file, or tar.gz file, any of those things, you would have to switch to binary mode. So these things are actually correct as described in the book. So it's FTP, or File Transfer Protocol, is not just the name of the protocol, it's also the name of the command. It's a popular way to share information over the internet, although these days web access is probably more popular. So there's three things that you need to have, or three pieces of information that you need to have before you can transfer files. First is the name of the server. So this can be a local server, like that seems to be what this case is. So we don't have one. We don't have a standard FTP server in our lab. And anyway, any server that we set up in the lab is not going to be accessible from outside the campus. So typically you would say FTP and then some internet address of a FTP server. Once you get that, if that works, if there is such a server, then you'll be prompted to enter the username that you want to access as. So that's the second piece of information, and the third piece is the password. So you need those three pieces of information: the IP address of the server, a valid username, and the corresponding password. Okay, so if this works, you would get a username, password, and then you would be able to issue commands to start transferring files. So FTP just sort of logs you into the file at the FTP server, and then you have to start transferring files. Okay. I think this is all just a repetition. Once again, you need the name of the remote site. It establishes a connection. There's a lot of things very interesting things as far as how the network setup occurs and all that. We're not going to get into that. We're just going to look at it as a simple command. Okay, so once you get in, you issue commands to transfer files. Okay, so we'll take a look at this. And you want to keep in mind that the client system, that the system that you're using it from, is called a local host, and the remote machine, that is wherever that machine is, that machine that you're accessing that's far away, that's called the remote host. So there's a local host and remote host. You want to keep that in mind. So take a quick look. If you don't know the name of a remote site, or if it turns out to not work, then what you'll get is the FTP prompt. So you don't go back to the shell. Once you start FTP, you're in an FTP command mode, and you have to quit that command mode using the quit command or the buy command. So let's take a look at that. So if you were to say FTP and then Just make up some name. It doesn't exist for sure. I mean, chances are very low that you would have a server with that name. And it'll say no address associated with the host name, and it'll give you an FTP prompt. So at this point, you can still try to set up a connection with some server. You can try FTP dot, let's try uwm.edu, and there is no such site. Let's try Csis. Csis.uwm.edu, and sure enough, we just happen to get lucky. There is an FTP server at csis.uwm.edu. Unfortunately, we don't know any usernames, so you can always try anonymous. Okay, so anonymous means you're not providing them information about who you are, because maybe you don't have an account at that server. Often servers will disable the anonymous username, because if you do that, if you allow anonymous access, anyone on the entire internet can access your FTP server and maybe mess things up. In this case, it asks for your complete email as password, and you can try this. I don't think it'll work. All right. m.edu. I'm just going to type in a email, and in this case it doesn't work, just only because I'm guessing anonymous FTP logins are disabled. So at this point we might say, okay, I'm done, and you can just say quit, or I believe buy will work the same way. Okay, so you can say quit or buy and you're back. Okay, so that was a simple introduction to FTP, how to run the program. Of course, none of our connections worked, and let's take a look at maybe an anonymous. There are also various really well-known anonymous FTP servers. So I know one of them is one at MIT, FRTFM. I don't want to say what that stands for. You guys, some of you might be able to guess. So this rtfm.mit.edu. Okay, looks like it's working. So by default, the username that if you don't specify it, you will be this username, UWRF, which is your user on this live DVD. So you don't want to say that, you want to say anonymous password. Let's try no password. Yep, got it. So often sites will do that. They will say you can log in as anonymous with no password. Sometimes they ask you to type in your email address, things like that. So at this point, we are in the FTP command mode, and you can switch to binary mode to transfer files, or you can stay in ASCII mode. We're just going to stay in ASCII mode for now. Now when you say ls, it doesn't list files in your local machine, it lists the files in the remote machine. Okay, so these are the list of files in the remote machine. They are all files except the very last one. There's a pub folder. And let's just take a look at some of these files. So if we, let's say, wanted to download this file over here, ls-lrz, you can guess what that is. You say get ls minus, no spaces, minus lr dot z. This, I have a feeling, will not work because this is a compressed file and we are in ASCII mode right now. Let's try it. It switched to binary mode automatically. Good. Used to be that you had to switch yourself. You have to say binary or bin and switch to binary mode. It looks like we did not have to do that. It automatically switched. And now, if we create a terminal and say ls. Here is that .z file. So remember all the stuff that we learned about compression. We can uncompress that. Alright, might have worked. Let's check. There it is, our ls-lr file. So we did not check the size, although we can get it from here. It was about 938 kilobytes, and it gets expanded up to 4 megabytes. So when you uncompress it, it's a lot bigger. And so now let's resize this. So that's the disadvantage of FTP, is FTP sort of takes over your window, your terminal, and you have to open up another window to see what it gives you. Let's do a head ls-lr, and what it has is ls-lr, or long listing, recursive long listing output put into a file. So you can take a look at that if you want. Let's get some other file. So let's try this one. This is not too bad. It looks like it's a 345 kilobyte file which expands out fully to 3 megabyte file. It's a GZ file. So get index by time.gz, and it's sure. Okay, not bad. So 345 kilobytes. Let's quit out of here. So once we know that we've transferred all the files we need, you can hunt around. You can cd, for example, to pub. That will go to this pub directory. It's not, you're not cding in your local host, you're cding in your remote host. Alright, so now you can say pwd, you're in /pub, you can say ls, and there's a ton of stuff in there. Okay, I'm not going to go over that. You can experiment, download some of these files, unzip them, things like that. What I'm going to do is quit, list all the files, and I noticed that I got my GZ file. Let's try unzipping it. gunzip index by time.gz. May have worked. Sure enough, it did. There is our file. And if you run ls-l, that 300 kilobyte file is now has been uncompressed into a 3 megabyte file. And you can do a head. It's just a simple file. Take the first 10 lines, and it's got a bunch of information about all the things that are in this /pub directory that we just saw. So instead of going there and hunting around, you can download this index file and then see what looks interesting to you and download them. So I hope you got a rough idea of how to use FTP. We will go over some of the options, some of the other options of FTP in the next video.